This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, I'm the Blood Guy. Welcome back to another review of a film based on a real life serial killer. And before I get too far, I know my eyes are a little unsightly. Just bear with me. I've had a bit of a reaction all day. Not much I can do about it, so please bear with me. But this is a serial killer that I have not covered a film of yet, which is weird because I consider him to be one of the most notorious American killers. Even if it is kind of an unsolved case, it's kind of messy. This isn't even the first film or only film based on this killer. It's not even the only one that I own. There was another one that I bought, one of the first ones I picked up back in November. But then I was doing some reading on it, and the angle it takes didn't really interest me, so it'll be something I'll save for some other time. But this is one that I just picked up. I wanted to check out the first film based on this killer, which is actually based on a book based on the killer, which came out in 1968. But I've heard it's very, very loose, so that was for free on YouTube. But this is for the 2006 film, The Boston Strangler, which this was put out by Anthem Pictures. This is kind of a glorified Uwe Lamel film, directed by Keith Wally. I mean, it's shot on video. It's very poorly acted. It's not very well put together, especially the sound design. It is very hard to hear sometimes. The acting really isn't great, save for Mauro Lanini, who plays Albert DeSalvo. He does all right. His accent's kind of weird. I don't really know what he's going for. But it's an all right film. There's enough that's enough rooted in historical accuracy. Not very much, but enough. It's kind of messy because the Boston Strangler case, 13 women were killed between 1962 and 64. March of 65, this guy, Albert DeSalvo, who was serving time for a series of rape cases, he confesses to a fellow inmate that he's the Boston Strangler and turns into this whole thing. The police really want him to be the Strangler, even though there's no evidence, yet he's able to recount all these details about the killer. Tried in 67, convicted for the rape charges, but never convicted of any of the Boston Strangler murders. And it's been nothing but theories ever since. I mean, DeSalvo was killed in 1973 in prison. His body's been exhumed twice since 2001. And it's come back as matches for at least the final victim. But a lot of times, like when you look up Albert DeSalvo or the Boston Strangler, like if you look in like a complete comprehensive encyclopedia, it'll be listed under Boston Strangler, and they'll talk about Albert DeSalvo. Yet, if you look at a smaller book like this, the article will be under Albert DeSalvo. I mean, by and large, he's considered to be the Boston Strangler, but there's not really much about him. There's not. This is kind of like there's a film I reviewed recently where there really wasn't that much detail about it. This is kind of similar. There's not really a whole lot of details about the murders or even some of the people involved in the case, so it was really hard to tell what's based on what. I mean, probably the most extensive book that I have would be this one, The Killer Book of Serial Killers. There's another one, Killer Book of True Crime. This one gets into it a little bit. Now, there is a definitive book called The Boston Strangler by Gerald Frank, which is what the 1968 film is loosely based on. But I mean, this gets the general basis of the DeSalvo story. It doesn't go into his backstory, really. It really just starts out with the final kill, him confessing to the fellow inmate, and then this detective being appointed to DeSalvo once that confession comes to light. And we kind of just get the story through his confessions. Almost the whole movie is pretty much his confessions and this detective trying to build the case against him, but really running into all these walls, kind of barring him from being able to be convicted. It's a really good story. I mean, in real life, it's a really good story. The other film I have is The Boston Strangler: The Untold Story, which actually has Bud Bundy as Albert DeSalvo. I think this takes the direction of George Nasser, the fellow inmate being the Strangler. I haven't checked it out yet, but there is an upcoming film with Keira Knightley that's supposed to be pretty accurate, directed by Matt Ruskin. I'm pretty excited for that to come out. I think there was a TV movie called Hunt for the Boston Strangler, but so far this is the only one I've seen. And I guess what makes it worth it is it's very surface level accurate as far as when he describes during his confessions when he's going into detail about the murders. A lot of those are about as accurate as what we have in books. And Mauro Lanini's performance. I mean, he looks enough like Albert DeSalvo. I've heard DeSalvo has kind of a high voice. I tried looking up an interview or a recording of him, but I couldn't find any. He's portrayed as this very boastful, braggy kind of guy, a really short guy that brags a lot. So I think they got the portrayal right in a lot of ways. However, I think it portrays him as more of a sadistic sociopath than DeSalvo really was. I mean, DeSalvo was known to even weep during times. I mean, he he was a guy that would talk big, but when the chips were down, he would break down and cry, like when he had to call his wife to tell him that he's being arrested for everything. And at first, when he tried to deny everything. But other than that, he was a big bragger. And the movie portrays him as sort of this just mean, cold, gleefully evil. Bragging about each murder in the confessions as if he loves it and he enjoyed it. But there were some that DeSalvo was even known to kind of show regret about. Even his second murder, who was a woman that died of a heart attack as soon as he grabbed her, he was known to weep when he talked about that. So I think he's shown a bit more kind of horror movie evil killer than he really was. But other than that, the rest of the acting really was not that great. I mean, it was better than in a Uwe Lamel film. You have Jason David as Detective Sean Riley, who kind of looks like a discount version of Josh Hartnett. Camille Landon as his wife Catherine. Doug Cole as Dr. Tanner. Brian O'Dell as Joseph Kelly. And Curtis Nimsmith as George Nassar. And the acting, there's not much to say about it. I mean, other than the guy that plays DeSalvo, who does a serviceable job, I think maybe they went a little overboard with the portrayal, but his performance was fine, especially in the look. Even the setup of the film, showing the last kill, and then just sort of building the whole movie and telling the story through a confession, which you don't always get flashbacks. Sometimes you do. I thought that was alright. It does leave out a lot. It doesn't really get into how desperate police were before DeSalvo confessed and brought in two psychics. But it does get into some of the finer details, like how the witnesses could identify Nasser but not DeSalvo. It does get kind of laughable when they try to age the detective, especially at the end when it shows him in 2001, kind of laughable old guy makeup. But probably my biggest thing, other than the shot on video didn't even really get to me that much, but what really got to me was the sound design. It was really hard to hear some of the dialogue. It was kind of equal with a lot of the background audio or music. So, and especially with the accent that Lenini's going for in playing DeSalvo, it was kind of hard to catch what he was saying. But it's definitely way more competent than an Uwe Lamel film, but it kind of does. It feels like a better version of one, and it definitely has enough accuracy in it to warrant a watch. I would definitely take everything with a grain of salt and know you should probably do some research after. Is it the least accurate movie I've ever seen? Absolutely not. But it still does get a lot of stuff right. It is more of like a loosely based kind of approach. All names other than DeSalvo have been changed, which was another thing that was kind of hard to tell who these characters were based on, like Sean Riley or the doctor that evaluates DeSalvo. It was kind of hard to tell who's based on who, which made it even harder to see how accurate the film was. But as far as like the murders go, and how suspicion of DeSalvo got out, and looking into DeSalvo and all the roadblocks they hit, that's all fairly accurate. I mean, it's changed slightly, like it always is, but it's more accurate than I was expecting. I was expecting this to be another Uwe Lamel kind of mess, but it really wasn't. But there's really not much to say about it, honestly. It's kind of forgettable. I did end up having to take a lot of notes because it does get kind of confusing. I mean, during the confession, they go through all the victims in order. They go chronologically, but like when they say okay, number 7, but then when he's describing her, it sounds a lot like number 10. So you kind of got to figure out where they're coming from. Like, is the detective just going through the 11 that they have, not the 13 that he's confessing to? Is that why the order's messed up? It can get kind of confusing sometimes, but it's not an awful movie, but it's not a very good one either. But I was surprised by how much is accurate, and I was kind of impressed by the guy that plays DeSalvo. I thought he did do a good job. I think they kind of exaggerated a lot about his character, which kind of makes sense. DeSalvo was known to exaggerate quite a bit. I mean, police thought he was guilty of 300 rapes. DeSalvo said 2,000. So, I mean, I guess it makes sense that they would exaggerate his portion of the story because that's really what DeSalvo was. But yeah, definitely. Of course, I can't compare it to this one. I started watching this once and I just couldn't get into it. But this is one that I will check out. And I will check out the one from 1968 with Tony Curtis. But yeah, definitely get yourself a book or a documentary. There's great documentaries out there. Like Born to Kill, Most Evil. Uh, there's a TV movie, there's a documentary called Hunt for the Boston Strangler. And definitely keep an eye out for that upcoming Keira Knightley film. So yeah, definitely not the worst film I've seen, but far from the best as well. I mean, it's definitely sort of that no man's land, kind of forgettable. Maybe lean a little bit more towards the bad, just because it does kind of feel like an Uwe Lamel film. I will say this one did do a better job with the trying to make it feel period, especially the way it opens up with the final kill and her two roommates. The clothes and the hair do feel 1960s. It's not like that throughout the whole film, but I do give it credit for trying. So yeah, it at least worth checking out if you're into true crime and the topic of serial killers. Uh, but with that, I guess we'll get into the short summary. And forgive me, but I did have to make a lot of notes because this movie was kind of hard to tell what exactly they were going for. So let's get into that. So as always, I like to give a brief summary on the killer that the film is based on. So Albert DeSalvo, born September 3rd, 1931, has for almost 60 years been the main suspect in one of Massachusetts' most notorious murder cases. Originally called the Silk Stocking Murders, between 1962 and 64, in which 11 women were raped and strangled with nylon scarves and stockings. DeSalvo would then confess to 13 murders in March of 1965. He was already serving for a series of rapes known as the Green Man and the Measuring Man, where he would be wearing green work clothes and claimed to be from a modeling agency, and once let inside the home of women, he would go to get their measurements, where he would attack and assault them. And law enforcement believes that there were some 300 of these Green Man and Measuring Man assaults, where the exaggerating DeSalvo claims it was somewhere over 2,000. He then confessed to fellow inmate George Nassar, who informed his attorney, F. Lee Bailey, who then took on DeSalvo, and authorities wanted him for the now called Boston Strangler. He was tried in 1967 for his rape charges, but was never convicted on any of the Strangler cases. And there was never any physical evidence to link him to any of the murders. DeSalvo once escaped that year with two fellow inmates to further prove he was the Strangler, but he was caught a few days later. Shortly before his death in 1973, he attempted to recant his confession, leaving behind letters of his, quote, truth. On November 25th, 1973, he was found dead in the Walpole Prison Infirmary, stabbed to death. Some sources will say 16 times, other sources will say some 60 times. Supposedly for selling amphetamines above the prison price. Although his killer was never identified, an associate of Whitey Bulger, named Robert Wilson, was tried, but the trial ended in a hung jury, so we still don't fully know who killed Albert DeSalvo. In the half-century since the murders, there have been much speculation and many theories on who the Strangler is, and why DeSalvo confessed, including Nasser being the Strangler, or both of them, and Nasser informing his attorney on DeSalvo confessing in order for them to both get the reward money. In any case, DeSalvo's body has been exhumed twice, first in October 2001, and again in June 2013, to test DNA against the final victim, Mary Sullivan, and with the DNA of a nephew of DeSalvo. The first time it was inconclusive, and the second time was a near-perfect match. We may never know who killed all of the 13 Boston women, but DeSalvo has always been the prime suspect and the name and face associated with the notorious moniker. And sorry I was stuttering through that so much. I'm trying to read with this watery eye on top of my usual stutter. So the film, it opens up, and this does have dates and captions. So this says Boston, Massachusetts, January 4th, 1964, 6:09 p.m. Now, I don't know if any of the times are correct, but for the most part, it does get the dates correct. We see a woman named Sarah is raped and killed in her apartment. We don't see it, but we see the Strangler kind of walk in front of her. She's found by her two roommates. They thought she was sleeping, so they let her be. And then they went in her room to find her strangled with a nylon scarf and a broom sticking out between her legs, and a Happy New Year card placed between her toes. True date, it was January 4th, 64. Her name wasn't Sarah. Again, all the names have been changed. It was Mary Sullivan. But it was pretty much close to real life. She was assaulted with a broom handle. She did have the Happy New Year card between her toes or between her feet. Her two roommates did come home late. They thought she was sleeping, but then they went to go check on her, and that's what they found. However, it doesn't show it, but I did read that a nearby motorcyclist heard the screams, and he was the one that called the police. And this is the murder that DeSalvo would not be officially linked to and confirmed for until 2013. During the opening credits, it shows the address as 44, which she lived on 44 Charles Street. All the photos, locations, and articles it shows during the credits are authentic, even having footage of the real of Albert DeSalvo. Then it says Bridgewater Correctional Facility. DeSalvo is serving for the series of rapes, the Green Man and Measuring Man, which I think he had already served. I think he'd already been tried for the Measuring Man, and he served like 11 months, got out for good behavior, and that was when he started killing. But he's talking to a fellow inmate named George Nasser, which is the guy's real name. Only he met him at Bridgewater State Hospital, I think it was, not the correctional facility. But he talks about some of his murders, like he confessed to killing a 55-year-old, but she was known to look younger, which in real life, his first victim, Anna Elsa Slessers, she was 55, 56, but known to look younger. Strangled and assaulted with an unknown object. I think that was the one where it was said to be a wine bottle. And during all the confessions, you get like the same flashes of like the same few victims. Then he tells Nasser that he's had 13, which is true. He says Connie Tyler was his 8th victim, tied her up, strangled her with 2 stockings. His 8th victim was Patricia Jane Bullock Bissett. She was 22, 23, killed New Year's Eve of 62, strangled with stockings in her home. Some sources say she was covered with a blanket all the way up to her chin, breaking the pattern of these sort of tableaus. Says his next victim was 327 Lincoln Street, and what a mess. His next victim was 319 Park Street in Lawrence. It was Mary Ann Brown, who's a 69-year-old, March 6th of 63. She was sexually assaulted and beaten with a pipe, which I'm guessing is what the mess was that he referred to. She was not initially linked to the murders because she didn't have the special knot or bow in the ligature, and she was beaten to death. So yeah, he actually met Lasar at the Bridgewater State Hospital. And so then it says Monday, March 8th, 65, we're introduced to Detective Sean Riley. DeSalvo is mentioned as the Measuring Man, where he would pretend to be from a black and white modeling agency, be let in, then he would get their measurements, that's when he would grab and assault them. That along with the Green Man. They mentioned that Nasser called his lawyer Stanley Card, told him about DeSalvo, and now they want DeSalvo for the Strangler. Now Nasser's lawyer was actually F. Lee Bailey, who was already famous for the Sam Shepard case, being able to get Sam Shepard off from killing his wife back in 1956, I believe, because he was convicted and sentenced. And then through one of the earliest cases of blood spatter, Shepard was cleared, and Bailey was his lawyer. So Riley is tasked with getting DeSalvo to confess. They're giving him a week. I'm guessing Riley is either based on F. Lee Bailey, who did take DeSalvo's case, or he's based on John Bottomley, who DeSalvo also confessed to. And he was the special assistant to the Attorney General. There is another character that he answers to that is said to be the Attorney General, so I'm leaning more towards John Bottomley. But he could also be based on Philip J. DiNatelli, who was the lead investigator that built the case against DeSalvo. I'm leaning more towards either Bailey or Bottomley. And I think DeSalvo just did all the confessing in one day, in one go, which was March 6th of 65, not the 8th, and not like a whole week. I don't know if they're going for like a 7 type approach or what. But Riley meets with DeSalvo, begins the confessions. starting with the Measuring Man crimes. He does say Black and White Modeling Agency, which was the one that he made up. He asks about Janice Kovacs. DeSalvo says she was the first, which I already explained her, which was Anna Elsa Slessor's. Flashback, he breaks in, strangles her with the phone cord. She was actually strangled with the robe belt. Says his second actually died of a heart attack, which was true. That was Mary Mullen. She was 85. That was June 28th of 62. Supposedly, when he talked about her, he started to cry. And sometimes when he would see his woman's reflection, or his victim's reflection in the mirror, he would start to cry, feel bad, and leave. But he was known as a, I think it was like a super reassurance type attacker, according to John Douglas, which I'll probably mention that later. As she collapsed of a heart attack as soon as he grabbed her. Says the third, he attempted to make it look like a robbery. He actually ransacked a few of the victims' homes. Which, if we're going in order, the third was Nina Frances Nichols. She was 68, June 30th of 62, which was actually the same night as victim 4, Helen Elizabeth Blake, who was 65. They were both killed on the same night, but in their own home. Mentions his fifth. Once they go on, they don't really go into much detail, but mentions his fifth, and he just kind of says things like, yeah, I really enjoyed her, or yeah, I remember. Doesn't really go into any detail. But his fifth was Ida Irga, who was 74, August 19th, 62. Again, all names have been changed. Doesn't really get into much detail. Riley does mention how the first few were elderly, which is true. Says his sixth wasn't found for 10 days, which is somewhat true. Jane Buckley Sullivan, who was 67, she was killed August 21st of 62. She wasn't found till the 30th, so 9 days. Mentions how the seventh was different, as she was young and black, which is true. His seventh victim was Sophie Clark. She was African American and 20 years old. Killed December 5th of 62. Now, he's asked if he sexually assaulted her. He says no, he only masturbated on her. But everything I've read said that she was found to be sexually assaulted. And then it's cut short because he's only allowed an hour to interrogate him. Now, I don't know if that's true in real life. He calls and meets with a witness named Allison Owens. She tells him of a Mr. Thompson who knocked on the door, saying he was there to paint the apartment. She says it was already painted and my husband is asleep in the next room, so he apologizes and leaves. I think she's based on Marcella Lolka, who is one of two female witnesses that was called upon. She lived on the same block as Sophie Clark and was visited by the Strangler the same day she was killed. And it was the whole thing, Mr. Thompson, here to paint, husband's in the next room. Now, this scene, I do like how it was shot, because we have both of them looking at each other from across the table in the foreground. And in the background, we see the exchange of knocking on the door, I'm here to paint, my husband's asleep. But we don't hear it, and it's out of focus. I thought that was a neat way to kind of get her story, sort of show what she's explaining. So yeah, I like how that was filmed. But she does mention the girl upstairs being killed when she lived in a different building than Sophie Clark. She just lived on the same block. And actually, I'll save that for later because it does come up. So then Tuesday, March 9th, 65, we're on day 2 of the confession. They really just keep talking about the 7th one. He asks him about the witness, Allison Owens. He can't recall her, which we'll see later that she could identify him either. probably this is alluding to the notion that he might not be the Strangler and the start of the roadblocks for Riley. And then they just go back to talking about the seventh again. Uh, and then in between a lot of these, it shows Riley and his wife and how he's pulled away from her and how she's pregnant. And then so we get to day three of the interrogation. He says that his eighth victim was a singer, and we get a flashback of him going into apartment 210. We hear her singing. He does his modeling agency ruse, and so we see him giving her measurements. Each time he's finding a new way to touch her, and we kind of see him go like, which he was said to be like sexually obsessive, um, and having one of the most crushing sexual drives of people that the doctors have ever evaluated. Um, so then he attacks her with her scarf, then brutally stabs her to death. Now, which in real life, the tenth victim was uh, Beverly Sammons, who was 23. She was killed May 6th of 63. Now, in the original 11 victims that the police had, she was number 8. So that's why I'm guessing they're going by that order, where when you look at the order of the full 13, she was actually number 10. But she was a choir singer. Suspicion arose when she was late to choir practice, and she was found stabbed to death. She was the first one that he would stab, which I think maybe that's why she might have been one of the two that wasn't initially linked to the Boston Strangler because of the stabbing, or maybe it was the following where he just stabbed her. But in any case, he then goes to talk about his past, saying how his father was abusive and his father sold him and his sister to a farmer. It was never proven, but DeSalvo did once say that his father sold him and two of his sisters to a farmer in Maine for $9. And they were there for 6 months, but that was never proven. He mentions his wife Irma and their kids. His wife was Irmgard Beck, which Irma was her nickname, and they had 2 kids, Michael and Judy. Time runs out again. He tells his superior that other witnesses can't ID DeSalvo, and they don't recognize him, which is true. Then day 4, Riley goes to the doctor evaluating DeSalvo. He could be based on Dr. Harry Kotzel or Kozol, who evaluated DeSalvo in 67. He actually lived to be 102, died in 2008. Or James A. Brussel, who was the doctor that testified against him. He doesn't really go into detail about his profile or evaluation. But just as he's more than capable of the crimes, though I think at the time many of the doctors believed that Nasser fit the profile and capabilities more than DeSalvo. They bring Allison Owens in to sit in a chair waiting for visitors, so when the prisoners come in, she can spot out who Mr. Thompson was. She doesn't pick out DeSalvo, but she picks out Nasser. And he tells his superiors this, and they don't like that. Which is true. Marcella Lolka was more positive about Nasser and couldn't ID DeSalvo, along with a number of the witnesses. Wow. They could all identify Nasser and not DeSalvo. During questioning, he gets the victim in question wrong, gets it confused with the previous one, the one that died of a heart attack, and brags about it, which the death of Mary Mullen actually disturbed DeSalvo to an extent, and he apparently wept. But then remembers the one in question and says that it was the final one, and it shows the one from the beginning of the film, January 4th, 64. Riley tells him there's no evidence that links him to any of the crimes, and he freaks out. Riley starts to wonder if it really was Nasser. Officials weren't even sure if he was, in fact, the Strangler. They really just wanted to build a case to help, help ease the people of Boston. It kind of was one of those cases. Uh, Friday, I put that wrong. It's the final day. March 12th is what I meant to type. Riley's report is due, and he doesn't have one, or he doesn't have the confession. Just a bunch of ifs and whats. Uh, Not a confession they could use to tie or link DeSalvo to any of the murders. Says he's already going away for life and trying to cash in on the fame and use the money of book and movie deals to help set his family up financially, which is true, and that is one of the theories as to why he would confess or why him and Nasser might have teamed up to split the reward money, because there was a $10,000 reward, but they misinterpreted that as $10,000 per victim, so they thought it was going to be $110,000. And DeSalvo already knew he was going away for life for all his rape charges, so he wanted to use the reward money, and anything he could get from being the Boston Strangler to help set up his wife and kids. And also, this is pre-Son of Sam law, so book and movie deals he probably still could have profited from. Riley fixes his report to make DeSalvo the Boston Strangler. Through voiceover news narration, we hear that DeSalvo has been sentenced to life. He was in early 1967, he was sentenced. Very early 67, because I think it was in February, he and the two other inmates escaped. This is Monday, November 26th of 73. Riley gets the call that DeSalvo has been acting strange and sounding worried in Walpole Prison Infirmary, and that there's a meeting the following day with DeSalvo, that doctor that was evaluating him, and Riley. They try to make Riley look older, even though 8 years have gone by. They make his hair a little gray, give him like a Mr. Rogers cardigan. We see that his son is now like 8 years old, and that him putting away DeSalvo without being 100% sure is kind of eating away at him. Now it said the 26th, and the following day we're going to have a meeting, when in reality, on the 25th, the day before, DeSalvo was stabbed. Some sources say 16, some say 68 times. I know it's a big spread. I've seen both. Killed in the infirmary the previous day on the 25th. It just shows him laying there, and we just see a figure step in front of him. That's all we see. The killer would never truly be identified. And so then we jump to Thursday, December 13th, 2001. There's a press conference held at DeSalvo and the final victim have both been exhumed for DNA testing, and DeSalvo was not a match. Now, it is true that in October of 2001, Mary Sullivan's body and Albert DeSalvo's body were both exhumed to take DNA for testing. It did come back inconclusive, but I've also read that it came back like a 99.9% match, and they wanted 100. So they did exonerate DeSalvo as of 2001, but later on, in June of 2013, he would be exhumed again, and DNA of one of DeSalvo's nephews would also be used off a water bottle, tested towards, I believe it was some semen found at the Sullivan crime scene. And this time it came back that DeSalvo, that it was a match. Now, some people still say that only proves that he was there, doesn't prove that he was the killer. It pretty much leads to that Albert DeSalvo, at the very least, killed Mary Sullivan. Maybe not all 13, but in here, Riley has really white hair and wrinkles, and then Riley's given a letter written by DeSalvo recanting his confessions, which he did write letters 2 weeks before his death trying to clear his name. And that's the 2006 film, The Boston Strangler. So it does have some accuracy to it. It doesn't show the life and crimes of the Boston Strangler. It it kind of takes a smart approach because it's just told through the unreliable narrator of Albert DeSalvo during his confessions. A lot of times it'll just show like a shadowy figure, unless it's a confession that it shows that it's DeSalvo. But it does have some accuracy to it. I do like how it doesn't just come out and say uh, he was the killer and actually show him. It's not the biopic. It's not a biopic where it shows his life sort of in chronological time. It is told through flashbacks, through that one little window between his confession to Nasser and his confessions to police. It it does hinge on the idea that he it does play out that no one knows if he is or not. So that's fairly accurate. Of course, it came out in 2006 before the second exhumation of his body. Now, I know the 1968 film is not very accurate either. I don't know if this one will either. Uh, at least as far as the victims on their dates, how they were killed, and how the investigation was handled. But I hope the upcoming one with Keira Knightley is well made and as accurate as possible. But other than that, it does kind of feel like a glorified Uwe Lamel film, shot on video, not very good acting. Either not very good to pretty terrible acting. The guy playing DeSalvo does help it. Again, I think his portrayal is a bit more exaggerated than the real thing, which does kind of help seeing how that's the kind of person that DeSalvo was. So it's not a terrible film. Again, it's at least worth checking out. Just don't put a whole lot of stock into it. It's one of those films where all names are changed, a lot of scenarios are changed, but there is some truth into a lot of it. So it's not a very good film, but I was surprised with how much it got right, and with the performance by Mauro Lanini. Wow, I'm stuttering really bad today. So I do have a few more serial killer films to get to, and a few more documentaries as well. Not sure what order I'll be doing them in, but I do have some to get to, so stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.